Isaiah Coleman, blood trickling from a split lip, grips his gavel in a packed Harborview courtroom, robes billowing as he glares at two trembling cops, Derek Holt and Travis Payne, who cuffed him yesterday under a scorching sun. Their smirks falter when he thunders, "You're in my court now." 24 hours ago, he was just a man in a suit, slammed against his car by these bigots, a crowd stunned. One arrest sparked a war that'll reshape this city. What unleashed this chaos? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you stand for justice, and stay tuned for more jaw-dropping tales. Isaiah Coleman stepped out of his gleaming black sedan near Harborview's crowded pier, the salty breeze tugging at his tailored grey suit, a crisp white pocket square peeking out like a quiet rebellion against the chaos around him. 42. Years old, with salt and pepper hair cropped close and a steady gaze that could cut glass. He carried a weathered leather briefcase, its edges worn from years of late nights, poring over legal briefs. He was due at the governor's office in 30 minutes, a meeting about funding for community courts, his latest push to fix a broken system. The pier hummed with life, fishermen haggling over buckets of shrimp, tourists snapping photos of the shimmering water, and street vendors shouting about fresh oysters. Isaiah moved with purpose, his polished Oxfords clicking against the uneven planks, a man who belonged anywhere he chose to be. But to officers Derek Holt and Travis Payne, rolling slow in their dented squad car, he didn't fit. Holt, 35, lean with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, nudged Payne, a stocky 29-year-old with a sunburned neck and restless hands, as they locked eyes on Isaiah. His suit, his car, his calm stride screamed outsider to their narrow world, a world where black men in nice clothes were threats, not professionals. They swung the cruiser to a stop, tires squealing, dust kicking up in a gritty cloud that made a kid nearby cough and scatter. Holt was out first, boots slamming the ground, his hand hovering near the Glock on his hip, while Payne flanked him, cracking his knuckles like a cheap thug in a bar fight. "Hands up, boy," Holt barked, his voice sharp and jagged, slicing through the pier's noise like a rusty blade. Isaiah froze mid-step, his briefcase dangling, shock rippling through him as he processed the words, the tone, the guns, now pointed at his chest. People turned, heads swiveling, a hush falling over the crowd as phones slipped out of pockets, lenses glinting in the midday sun. "Officers, what's the issue?" Isaiah asked, keeping his voice even, though a flicker of disbelief danced in his dark brown eyes. Holt smirked, stepping closer, his breath sour with coffee and contempt. "This your car? Looks stolen. Step away from it now." The accusation was absurd, plucked from nothing but the color of Isaiah's skin and the shine of his sedan. But Payne chimed in, his drawl thick and smug. "Heard reports of a theft around here. Fits the description." Lies. Every word, but the crowd didn't know that yet, and Isaiah's jaw tightened as he set the briefcase down slow, deliberate, hands rising to show empty palms. "That's my car. I've got the title in the glove box if you'd check," he said, steady as granite. But Holt's eyes narrowed, irritation flashing like a spark about to ignite. "Smart mouth, huh? Hands where I can see 'em, you're under arrest," he snapped, lunging forward with no warning, no cause, just raw prejudice fueling his fists. Payne grabbed Isaiah's arm, twisting it back, and together they slammed. Him against the sedan's hood, the metal hot from the sun searing through his suit jacket. Pain shot up his spine, but Isaiah didn't flinch, didn't shout, just locked eyes with a teenage girl filming 10 feet away, her hands trembling as she captured every second. The cuffs came next, cold and tight, biting into his wrists until he felt the skin chafe, blood welling under the steel. "You'll regret this," Isaiah said, his voice low, firm, a promise wrapped in quiet fury. But Holt laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the pier's rusted railings, while Payne yanked him upright, shoving him toward the cruiser's open door. "Keep talking, tough guy, see where it gets you," Payne sneered, slamming the door shut as Isaiah settled into the back seat. His suit now wrinkled, a smear of dirt across the gray fabric, his briefcase abandoned on the pavement like a soldier left behind. The crowd buzzed, voices rising in confusion, anger, fear, some shouting at the cops, others whispering about what they'd just seen. Phones kept rolling, red dots blinking, catching Holt's swagger as he climbed back into the driver's seat, Payne's shotgun, both oblivious to the storm they'd kicked up. Isaiah sat still, staring out the smudged window as the pier shrank behind them, the sedan's engine rumbling like a beast ready to pounce. He knew the law, knew his rights, knew this was wrong on every level, but he also knew Harborview, a city where justice bent for men like Holt and Payne, where badges were shields for bigotry. The governor's meeting faded from his mind, replaced by a colder truth. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a declaration of war, one that would burn through his life like wildfire through dry grass. They thought they'd won, thought they'd humbled him, but as the cruiser lurched onto the highway, Isaiah's lips pressed into a thin line, his mind already turning, plotting, because he wasn't just any man, he was a judge, and they'd just lit the fuse on their own downfall. Isaiah Coleman sat on a chipped metal bench inside Harborview's precinct, the air thick with mildew and the sour tang of sweat, his torn grey suit clinging to his frame as a dull ache throbbed in his ribs from where Officer Derek Holt's baton had landed earlier. The cell was a concrete box, walls streaked with grime, a flickering bulb overhead casting jagged shadows that danced like mocking ghosts. His wrists still bore red welts from the cuffs, now removed, but the sting lingered, a silent testament to the pier's brutality. Outside, officers Holt and Payne strutted past the bars, their boots scuffing the floor. Holt's thin lips curling into a sneer as he tossed a half-eaten apple core into a trash can, missing by a foot. "Think you're too good for us, huh?" he taunted, his voice a gravelly rasp honed by years of barking orders nobody dared question. Payne, slouched against the wall, chuckled low, scratching his sunburned neck, his eyes glinting with petty malice. "Big man in a fancy suit, bet he's crying inside," he added, popping a stick of gum into his mouth, chewing loud enough to grate on the nerves. Isaiah kept his posture straight, hands folded in his lap, his face a mask of calm, though his pulse hammered beneath the surface, fury simmering in his veins like a storm ready to break. He'd asked for a phone call 3 times already, each request met with a snort or a shrug. The desk sergeant, Lila Monroe, a wiry woman with tired eyes and a tight bun, scribbling nonsense on a clipboard instead of helping. No calls for troublemakers, Holt had snapped after the first ask, slamming a fist on the counter, while Payne invented a new charge on the spot. Resisting arrest, that's what you get for mouthing off. The lie was flimsy, but the precinct swallowed. It whole, a machine oiled by apathy and prejudice. Lila hesitated once, her pen pausing as she glanced at Isaiah, something flickering in her gaze, doubt maybe, but she said nothing, just kept writing, logging him as a vagrant in a system that didn't care to check. "I'm a judge," Isaiah said at one point, his tone level, cutting through the noise of ringing phones and clacking keyboards, but Payne laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Sure you are, and I'm the mayor." Holt leaned in close, breath hot with stale tobacco. "Keep dreaming, boy, ain't no judge here, just a number." They walked off, leaving him to stew, their voices fading into the hum of the precinct, a hive of chaos where justice was a punchline. Isaiah's silence rattled them more than any protest could, his stillness a weapon they couldn't grasp, and it showed in the way Holt kept glancing back, irritation etching deeper lines into his weathered face. Hours crawled by, the clock on the wall stuck at 3:17, its hands frozen like the fairness in this place, and they dragged him to an interrogation room, a coffin-sized space with a flickering fluorescent tube and a table bolted to the floor. Holt perched on the edge, twirling a pen, while Payne paced, cracking his knuckles again, a nervous tic that betrayed their bravado. "Who'd you steal that car from?" Holt started, his questions a barrage of nonsense meant to wear him down, not uncover truth. "Where's your crew? We know you're running something," Payne piled on, leaning in so close Isaiah could smell the gum, now stale on his breath. Isaiah answered each with the same measured response, "Check my ID, you'll see who I am." But they ignored it, their game about control, not facts, their power a flimsy shield propped up by badges and lies. Outside these walls, a different fire was catching. Videos from the pier ricocheting across social media, grainy clips of Holt slamming Isaiah against the sedan, Payne twisting his arm, the crowd's gasps looping in every share. Hashtags bloomed. Like weeds, Justice for Isaiah trending as strangers typed furious threads. Activists in Harborview's cramped coffee shops plotting marches, their voices rising in digital chorus. The precinct's phone lines buzzed, reporters demanding answers, but the brass shut it down, a curt no comment from a sweaty lieutenant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Inside, Holt and Payne stayed blissfully ignorant, too busy mocking Isaiah's silence to notice the world shifting under their feet. "Think he's some kind of big shot?" Holt sneered, tossing the pen onto the table where it rolled and clattered to the floor, a petty victory in his mind. Payne grinned, leaning against the wall. "Guess he thinks staying quiet makes him innocent, huh?" Their laughter bounced off the concrete, hollow and cruel, but Isaiah's eyes stayed fixed ahead, unyielding, a lighthouse in their storm of stupidity. Lila slipped by the cell later, her shift winding down, and Isaiah caught her gaze, his voice soft but firm. "Check my ID, please, just look." She froze, lips parting like she might speak, then turned away, guilt tugging at her shoulders as she disappeared into the bullpen. The precinct churned on, a beast blind to its own unraveling, while Isaiah sat, plotting, his mind a steel trap they'd never crack. Hey folks, drop a comment with number 1 if you're raging at these cops' arrogance. Smash that like button if you're rooting for Isaiah to flip the script, and subscribe to catch every twist of this fight for justice. Imagine being locked up innocent while the world outside starts to burn. What would you do next? Isaiah Coleman leaned against the cold concrete wall of Harborview's precinct, his torn grey suit now a wrinkled mess, the ache in his ribs pulsing with every shallow breath as the precinct's chaos buzzed around him like a swarm of agitated hornets. The clock still mocked him from its perch, stuck at 3:17, while the clamor of ringing phones and barked orders filled the stale air. Desk Sergeant Lila Monroe shuffled past his cell again, her clipboard clutched tight, her hazel eyes darting to him with a flicker of unease that hadn't been there before. She'd overheard Holt and Payne earlier, their laughter echoing down the hall as they bragged about teaching that smartass a lesson, and something in their bravado gnawed at her, a splinter of doubt lodging deeper with every passing hour. Isaiah caught her gaze again, his voice steady despite the bruise blooming dark across his jaw. "Call my office, ask for Clara. She'll tell you who I am." Lila hesitated, her fingers tightening on the clipboard, then nodded almost imperceptibly, before slipping away, her footsteps quick and uneven against the scuffed linoleum. She ducked into a cluttered break room, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air, and punched a number into the precinct's battered landline, her hands trembling as she waited through 3 rings. Clara's voice crackled through, sharp and no nonsense. "Judge Coleman's office. Who's this?" Lila stammered. "This is Sergeant Monroe, Harborview PD. We've got an Isaiah Coleman here. Says he's a judge. That true?" Clara's reply was instant, clipped with irritation. "Yes, he's Justice Isaiah Coleman, Municipal Court, supposed to be meeting the governor right now. What the hell's going on?" Lila's face drained of color, her breath catching as she muttered a hasty thanks and hung up, the receiver clattering back into place. She bolted to the watch commander, a paunchy man named Rollins, who was nursing a soda and scowling at a stack of reports, and blurted out the truth, her words tumbling over each other. "We've got a judge in lockup. Holt and Payne brought him in. It's a mistake." Rollins sputtered, soda sloshing onto his desk, his jowls quivering as he barked for the 2 officers to get their asses in his office now. Holt and Payne swaggered in minutes later, Holt's scowl deepening, Payne popping his gum like it was a nervous tick, both reeking of sweat and smugness. Rollins didn't mince words. "You idiots cuffed a judge. Uncuff him. Let him go now." Holt's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides, but Payne just shrugged, muttering, "Whatever." "Not our fault he looked shady." They trudged to the cell, Holt yanking the keys from his belt with a jangle, Payne kicking the bars for effect, and swung the door open, Holt growling low, "Lucky break, get out." Isaiah stood slow, brushing dirt from his suit, his eyes locking onto theirs with a fire that made Payne shift uncomfortably. "This isn't over, gentlemen. You'll see me again." Holt sneered. "Yeah, right." But there was a hitch in his voice, a crack in his armor as Isaiah stepped past them, his head high, his Oxfords clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. The precinct doors swung open, and he walked into the muggy, Dusk, the sky streaked orange over Harborview's jagged skyline. A crowd of 30 or 40 gathered outside, some recognizable from the pier, their phones still out, now filming his release. Cheers erupted, ragged and raw, a woman in a red scarf shouting, "They can't keep us down!" As others clapped, their voices a rising tide of defiance. Isaiah raised a hand, a small gesture of acknowledgement, his lips twitching into the ghost of a smile as he breathed free air, the weight of the cell lifting for a moment. He thought he'd won, thought the nightmare was behind him, his mind already spinning toward the governor's meeting, rescheduling, turning this mess into a weapon against the system. But behind him, Holt and Payne lingered in the precinct's shadow. Holt's eyes narrowing as he watched Isaiah disappear into the crowd, his fingers drumming on his holster. "This ain't over," he muttered to Payne, who nodded, spitting his gum onto the pavement with a wet smack. "Not by a long shot." They slipped into an unmarked cruiser, its paint chipped and faded, the engine growling to life as they peeled out, tailing Isaiah through the city's winding streets, their headlights dimmed to avoid notice. Back at the precinct, Rollins slumped in his chair, wiping soda from his shirt, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond his desk, while Captain Victor Langston, a towering figure with a shaved head and a razor-thin scar across his cheek, loomed. In his office upstairs, staring at a grainy still from the pier video on his computer screen. Langston's voice was a low rumble as he picked up his phone, dialing Holt. "He's out? Good. Make sure he doesn't get comfortable. I want him buried." His lips curled into a cold smile, his meaty hands flexing as he leaned back, the chair creaking under his bulk. A man who'd climbed the ranks by crushing anyone who dared defy his version of order, especially someone like Isaiah, a black man with power who didn't know his place. The cruiser's taillights vanished into the dusk, weaving through traffic, closing the gap as Isaiah turned onto a quieter street, his sedan's engine humming, unaware of the eyes tracking him, the trap tightening. The crowd dispersed, their cheers fading into the night, but the videos kept spreading, likes piling up, comments raging, a spark igniting that Langston couldn't smother, not yet. Isaiah Coleman gripped the steering wheel of his black sedan, the engine's low hum blending with the cicada's drone as he navigated Harborview's foggy back roads, the city's lights fading into a hazy blur behind him. Night had settled thick and heavy, the air sticky with humidity, a faint mist curling around gnarled oaks that lined the narrow asphalt strip, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. His suit jacket hung over the passenger seat, the torn grey fabric still dusted with precinct grime, and his bruised ribs ached with every turn, a reminder of Holt and Payne's fists. The governor's meeting was a lost cause now, but his mind churned, plotting how to turn this day's chaos into a legal reckoning, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the wheel as he pictured their smug faces in court. He didn't see the unmarked cruiser lurking 200 yards back, its headlights off, a predator stalking through the gloom. Officers Derek Holt and Travis Payne hunched inside, their silhouettes tense with malice. Holt's knuckles whitened. On the dashboard, his buzz cut glistening with sweat while Payne gripped the wheel, his sunburned neck taut as he muttered, "Time to finish this." They'd trailed him from the precinct, fueled by Captain Langston's growled order over the radio. Bury him, make it look good, a command that lit a fire in their guts, a chance to crush the man who dared defy them. Isaiah rounded, a bend, the road dipping into a shadowed hollow, when the cruiser roared to life, its engine snarling as it surged forward, tires screeching on damp pavement. The impact came fast, a bone-rattling crunch as their front bumper slammed into his rear, sending the sedan fishtailing, gravel spraying like shrapnel. Isaiah's head snapped forward, his chest slamming against the seatbelt, air rushing from his lungs as he fought the wheel, tires squealing in protest. The car veered off the road, crashing through a ditch, branches snapping against the windows before it lurched to a stop, hood crumpled against a thick pine, steam hissing from the radiator. Holt and Payne leapt out, black ski masks pulled tight over their faces, Holt's Glock drawn, Payne clutching a tire iron, their boots crunching gravel as they closed in. Isaiah kicked the door open, stumbling into the fog, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, his vision swimming but his instincts sharp. "Know your place," Holt bellowed, his voice muffled but venomous. Firing a shot that grazed Isaiah's left arm, the bullet tearing through his sleeve, searing flesh as it buried itself in the dirt. Payne flared, hot and bright, but Isaiah lunged forward, tackling, Payne the tire iron clattering to the ground as they hit the mud. Payne grunted, flailing, his fist catching Isaiah's jaw, but Isaiah drove a knee into his gut, rolling free as Holt charged, gun raised. Another shot rang out, splintering bark inches from Isaiah's head, and he bolted into the woods, branches slashing at his face, his breath ragged, pulse hammering like a war drum. Holt cursed, firing blindly into the trees, while Payne staggered. Up, coughing, "He's done, let's go." But Holt snarled, "Not yet," his eyes wild, scanning the darkness as Isaiah vanished into the undergrowth, leaves swallowing his footsteps. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing, drawn by a passing trucker who'd seen the crash and dialed 911, his shaky voice already uploading a clip to the web. "Cops just ran a guy off the road, somebody help." Back at the scene, Holt kicked the sedan's fender, rage boiling as he barked into his radio. "Suspect assaulted us, he's armed, send backup." Payne nodded, wiping mud from his mask, adding, "Fled the scene. Dangerous." Langston's voice crackled. "Back, good, paint him dirty, I'll handle the rest." They peeled out, leaving the wrecked car smoldering, while Isaiah crouched half a mile away, chest heaving, blood soaking his sleeve, the forest a maze of shadows offering slim cover. His phone, cracked but alive, buzzed in his pocket, a flood of notifications, videos of the pier arrest now joined by blurry shots of the crash, captions screaming, "They're hunting him." Langston sat in his precinct office, a smirk tugging at his scarred cheek as he fed the press a fresh lie. Fugitive judge attacks officers at large, his words slithering onto news tickers, twisting Harborview's anger into confusion. Isaiah pressed a hand to his wound, wincing, his mind racing, freedom a fragile thread he'd barely grasped before it frayed again, the hunters closing in with sharper claws. If you're boiling mad at this setup, drop number 1 in the comments. Smash that like button if you're praying Isaiah makes it, and subscribe to see this fight explode. Picture this, you're running, bleeding, with nowhere safe to turn. How do you outsmart the wolves at your heels? Isaiah Coleman staggered through the dense woods outside Harborview, the fog clinging to his skin like a damp shroud. His left arm throbbing where Holt's bullet had grazed him, blood seeping through his torn sleeve and dripping onto the pine needles below. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, each inhale laced with the sharp sting of his bruised ribs, the night air cool but heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. Branches snagged at his ruined grey suit, tearing fresh holes in the fabric, while mud caked his once polished Oxfords, slowing his steps as he pushed deeper into the shadows, away from the distant wail of sirens and the glow of flashing lights. His cracked phone buzzed faintly in his pocket, its screen flickering with alerts he couldn't stop to read. But he knew the crash video was spreading, a lifeline he couldn't grasp yet. The trees thinned ahead, revealing a faint orange glow, and he stumbled toward it, his vision blurring from blood loss and exhaustion, every muscle screaming as he forced himself forward. The light came from a small barbershop, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Jamal's Cuts, a weathered wooden shack tucked off a gravel road, its windows steamed from the humid night. Isaiah knew Jamal Tate, a lanky 40-year-old with a quick laugh and a steady hand, a friend from years back when they'd bonded over late-night chess games at a community center. He pounded on the door, the sound dull against the thick wood, and Jamal cracked it open, his eyes widening at the sight of Isaiah battered and bleeding, his suit a shredded mess. "Jesus, man, what happened?" Jamal hissed, pulling him inside, the warm air hitting Isaiah like a wall, thick with the smell of aftershave and hair oil. The shop was dim, a single bulb swinging overhead, casting long shadows across faded posters of old boxing champs pinned to the walls. Isaiah collapsed into a cracked leather chair, wincing as Jamal locked the door and grabbed a first aid kit from under the counter, his hands shaking as he tore open gauze. "Cops, they ran me off the road. Shot at me," Isaiah rasped, his voice rough, each word a fight against the pain clawing his chest. Jamal worked fast, wrapping the arm wound tight, his brow furrowed, muttering, "This ain't right, you're a judge. They can't do this." Isaiah nodded, catching his breath. the makeshift bandage soaking red but holding for now. A flicker of relief easing the tension in his shoulders as he leaned back, thinking he'd found safety, a moment to regroup. Outside, Harborview was igniting, protests swelling in the streets, voices chanting his name near the pier where it all began, tires screeching as cars circled the precinct, horns blaring in ragged unison. News vans parked crooked, reporters shouting over each other, their cameras catching flickers of signs scrawled with "Free Isaiah" in bold marker, the crash video looping on every screen, shaky footage of the cruiser ramming his sedan, now at 1 million views and climbing. But inside the shop, the world felt distant, the hum of a radio playing soft jazz, a fragile shield against the storm. Jamal handed him a bottle of water, his fingers lingering on the plastic, his eyes darting to the window, as if expecting shadows to move. Isaiah drank deep, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat, and started to speak. "I need to get to the courthouse, expose them." But Jamal cut him off, his voice low. "Rest first, you're a mess. I got you." The trust felt solid, a lifeline after hours of running, and Isaiah let his guard slip, his eyelids heavy as the adrenaline ebbed. Then the phone rang, a shrill trill slicing through the quiet, and Jamal flinched, snatching it up, his back to Isaiah as he whispered, "Yeah, he's here, what do I do?" Isaiah's gut twisted, his senses snapping awake, but before he could move, headlights flared outside, twin beams cutting through the fog as a cruiser screeched to a stop. The door burst open, Holt and Payne storming in, tasers drawn, their masks gone now, faces twisted with fury and triumph. Holt's buzz cut gleamed under the bulb as he barked, "Thought you'd hide, huh?" and fired the taser, barbs sinking into Isaiah's chest, electricity surging through him, his body seizing as he crashed to the floor, the water bottle rolling away. Payne kicked the chair aside, grinning, "Told you it wasn't over," while Jamal backed into a corner, his hands up, tears streaking his face as he choked out, "I'm sorry, man. They threatened my kid. I had no choice." Isaiah's vision swam, pain exploding in waves, but he clawed at the floor, dragging himself toward the back, Holt's boot slamming down on his hand, a sickening crunch echoing as bones cracked. Payne grabbed his legs, yanking him back, and Isaiah lunged, knocking over a shelf, scissors and combs clattering as he dove for the rear window, smashing it with his elbow, glass shattering outward. He hauled himself through, jagged edges slicing, his palms, and hit the ground running, Holt's shouts fading as he bolted into the night, the taser's sting still burning in his nerves. Jamal sank to his knees, sobbing, while Holt radioed Langston. "He's gone again, slippery bastard," and Langston's growl came back, "Find him, or you're both done." Isaiah stumbled through the brush, betrayal a fresh wound deeper than the others, trust shattered like the glass behind him, his only refuge now the dark. Isaiah Coleman emerged from the tangled woods, his battered body a map of pain, the gash on his forehead crusted with dried blood, his left arm hanging limp, the graze wound now a dull, pulsing ache beneath the soaked bandage Jamal had tied hours. Daugo. His grey suit was a ruin, shredded by thorns and glass, mud streaking the fabric like war paint, his cracked phone clutched in his good hand, its screen flickering with a low battery warning. The fog had lifted, dawn breaking over Harborview in a blaze of pink and gold, the city's pulse quickening as he limped toward the clamour of voices rising from the heart of downtown. His ribs screamed with every step, the taser's jolt still, echoing in his nerves. But betrayal cut deeper, Jamal's tear-streaked apology looping in his mind, a wound no gauze could mend. He'd lost his car, his refuge, his trust, but not his fight, and as he neared Harborview Square, the roar of a crowd pulled him forward, a beacon in the haze of his exhaustion. The square was a sea of bodies, 100 strong, spilling across. Cracked pavement, their signs thrust high, scrawled with fury in bold red and black. "Justice for Isaiah," and "Cops can't silence us." The air thrummed with chants, a rhythm of defiance pulsing through the throng, car horns blaring from the streets beyond, a makeshift stage rigged with a microphone swaying under the weight of a wiry organizer. In a green hoodie, his voice booming, "They can't bury the truth." Isaiah slipped into the crowd, his torn suit drawing stares, then gasps, a ripple of recognition spreading as faces turned, eyes wide with shock and awe. A woman in a yellow, Sundress clutched his arm, her voice trembling. "You're him, aren't you, the judge?" He nodded, wincing as she pulled him toward the stage, the crowd parting like water, murmurs swelling into cheers, a tide lifting him up despite the weight dragging his bones. He climbed the rickety steps, the organizer thrusting the mic into his hands, and Isaiah faced the sea of faces, his breath catching at their fire, their faith a mirror to the resolve he'd clung to through the night. "I'm Isaiah Coleman," he began, his voice hoarse but steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. "And yesterday, officers Holt and Payne arrested me for nothing but the color of my skin." The crowd erupted, boos and shouts crashing against the morning sky, phones aloft capturing every word as he laid out the truth. "They beat me, chased me, shot at me, but I'm still here and they're still lying." His words hit like sparks on dry grass, the square igniting, a man in a trucker hat yelling, "We've got your back," while a teenage girl streamed it live, her feed exploding with hearts and angry emojis. News helicopters buzzed overhead, rotors chopping the air, their cameras zooming in as Isaiah raised a fist. "This isn't just my fight, it's ours, and we won't stop." The roar shook the ground, victory swelling in his chest, a fleeting taste of triumph after days of hell, his cracked lips curling into a defiant smile as he thought, maybe this is the turning point. But across town, Captain Victor Langston watched the broadcast on a precinct monitor, his scarred cheek twitching, his meaty fist slamming the desk, splintering a pencil in half. "He's done," he growled, dialing Holt. "Shut it down now." Holt and Payne, bruised from the barbershop brawl, crouched in a van 2 blocks away, Holt's eyes glinting as he rigged a burner phone typing a fake bomb threat. "Suspicious package, Harborview Square, planted by Coleman." Payne grinned. "This'll scatter 'em," and hit send, the message pinging to dispatch as Langston leaned into his radio. "All units, bomb threat, suspect on scene, move in." Sirens screamed to life, riot vans rolling out, their lights slicing through the dawn as the square's euphoria shattered. A crackling voice blared from a bullhorn. "Evacuate, bomb threat, clear the area." Panic surged, the crowd stumbling, screams piercing the air as mothers clutched kids, signs dropping to the pavement, trampled under fleeing feet. Isaiah froze, confusion flashing across his face, the mic slipping in his sweaty grip, when Holt burst from the chaos, unmasked now, his Glock drawn, firing a shot into the air, then another wild into the crowd, a man in a blue jacket collapsing, blood pooling as shrieks erupted. "He's got a gun!" Payne shouted, pointing at Isaiah, planting a rusted pistol near the stage, the frame-up snapping into place. Riot police stormed in, batons swinging, tear gas canisters hissing as they arced overhead, the square choking in grey clouds, coughs and cries drowning the chants. Isaiah leapt from the stage, shoving through the melee, his good arm shielding, his face as gas burned his lungs, Holt's shot still ringing in his ears. He ducked behind a dumpster, heart pounding, the crowd's faith fracturing, some yelling, "He did it!" As Langston's lie took root, news tickers flashing, "Judge incites riot, possible bomber." Isaiah ran, legs burning, the taste of victory souring into ash, his name a curse on half the lips that had cheered him moments ago. If you're sick of these dirty tricks, drop number 1 in the comments, hit that like if you're still with Isaiah, and subscribe to see this. Madness unfold. Picture the hope snatched away, the crowd turning. What's a man do when even the truth gets twisted? Isaiah Coleman crouched behind the rusted dumpster in Harborview Square, his lungs burning from tear gas, the acrid sting searing his throat as shouts and shattering glass echoed through the dissipating haze of the ruined rally. His grey suit hung in tatters, soaked with sweat and streaked with mud, the bandage on his grazed arm unraveling, blood trickling anew down his wrist, mixing with the grime on his cracked hands. The crowd's cheers had morphed into chaos, then silence as police cordoned off the area, their boots stomping a perimeter, while sirens wailed a mournful dirge across the waking city. His chest heaved, ribs aching from days of beatings, the taser's ghost still twitching in his muscles, and his head throbbed where the rally's hope had been crushed by Holt's gunshot and Langston's lies. He needed shelter, a breath, a plan, and the woods were too far, so he staggered through an alley, his shadow flickering under a dying street lamp, aiming for an abandoned warehouse he'd glimpsed earlier, its broken windows gaping like hollow eyes. The building loomed ahead, a crumbling brick relic from Harborview's shipping days, its roof sagging, rusted chains dangling from a loading dock, the air inside thick with dust and the faint tang of oil. Isaiah slipped through a splintered side door, the hinges groaning and slumped against a stack of rotting crates, his good hand clutching his side, breath shallow as he scanned the dark for threats. His phone was dead now, its last ping a futile SOS swallowed by the chaos, leaving him cut off, a hunted man in a city turning against him. Outside, Harborview churned, news vans replaying Holt's staged panic. "He's got a gun!" While Langston's voice droned on radio waves. "Armed and dangerous, approach with caution," the planted pistol a perfect prop in their script. Isaiah closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him, when a voice cut through the stillness, soft, but insistent. "Judge Coleman, that you?" He jolted upright, squinting into the gloom as a figure emerged, a young woman in a faded denim jacket, her braids tucked under a cap, holding a flashlight that trembled in her grip. "I'm Tasha. Saw you at the rally. You need help," she said, her tone urgent, her eyes darting to the door like she'd heard something he hadn't. Isaiah tensed, Jamal's betrayal still raw, but her face held a flicker of sincerity, and he nodded, too worn to argue. "Get me out of here." She gestured to a trapdoor under a pile of moldy tarps. "Basement. Cops won't look there." And he followed, limping as she pried it open, the wood creaking, revealing a dank stairwell. They descended, the air growing colder, the smell of mildew choking, and Tasha whispered, "I posted about you online. People are pissed." But before he could reply, footsteps thundered above, heavy and deliberate, the trapdoor slamming shut behind them. Holt's voice barked, "Got a tip, he's here." And Isaiah's stomach dropped, Tasha's flashlight clattering to the floor as she spun, her cap falling, revealing a wire taped to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. "They made me! I'm sorry!" Langston's trap had snapped shut, Tasha a pawn coerced by threats to her family, her help a lure to drag him back into the jaws of hell. The basement door exploded inward, splintering wood as Holt and Payne charged down, Holt's buzz cut, catching the dim light, Payne's fists already balled, their grins feral as they spotted him. "End of the line," Holt snarled, lunging, zip ties snapping around Isaiah's wrists, tighter than the precinct cuffs, cutting into his flesh as Payne hauled him up, slamming him against the damp wall, concrete scraping his cheek. They dragged him out, Tasha sobbing in the corner, her pleas lost in the scuffle as they shoved him into a black van, its windows tinted, engine idling like a beast ready to devour. The drive was short, a jolting ride through back streets to a black site jail, a squat concrete bunker hidden behind a junkyard, its barbed wire fence glinting under floodlights. Inside, Langston waited, his hulking frame filling the doorway, scar twitching as he smirked. "No judge can touch us here." His voice a low rumble that vibrated the rusted bars. They threw Isaiah into a cell, a 6x6 box with a stained mattress and a flickering bulb, the door clanging shut as Holt kicked his legs out, Payne cracking his knuckles with a laugh. "Time to break you." The torture began fast. Langston, watching from a folding chair, sipping coffee like it was a show, while Holt strapped Isaiah to a wooden plank, tilting it back, a rag stuffed in his mouth as Payne poured water from a dented bucket, the flood choking him, his lungs screaming, body thrashing against the ties, minutes stretched into eternity. The water stopped only for Holt to rip out the rag, snarling, "Confess, cop killer." And when Isaiah spat defiance, Payne jammed a cattle prod into his side, electricity searing through him, his scream muffled by the rag shoved back in. Hours bled together, bruises blooming across his torso, blood pooling under the zip ties, a leaked photo of his swollen face slipping onto the dark web, captioned, "Justice served," sparking outrage among the few who still believed. Langston paced, his boots thudding, "You're a ghost now, Coleman, nobody's coming." And Isaiah's spirit bent, fracturing under the weight, but his will held, a steel core they couldn't shatter, his eyes burning through the pain, plotting one. Last stand. Isaiah Coleman slumped against the cold wall of the black site cell, his wrists raw and bleeding under the zip ties, the sting of waterboarding still clawing at his throat. every breath a rasp that echoed in the 6x6 concrete tomb. His torn grey suit was a sodden rag, clinging to his bruised frame. The greys wound on his arm, festering beneath the soaked bandage, a dull throb pulsing in time with the cattle prod burns blistering his side. The flickering bulb overhead buzzed, like a dying insect, casting jagged shadows across the stained mattress, its springs poking through like broken promises. Hours had blurred into a haze of pain, Holt's snarls and Payne's laughter a relentless soundtrack, Captain Langston's hulking silhouette looming in the doorway earlier, his scarred cheek twitching as he'd barked, "Keep going, he'll crack." But Isaiah hadn't, his spirit bending under the weight, his body screaming, yet his mind a fortress, clinging to a shred of defiance they couldn't touch. Footsteps thudded outside now, lighter than the others, and a new face appeared at the bar's. Officer Reese, a wiry rookie with sunken eyes and a nervous tick, his uniform ill-fitting, his badge gleaming too bright for this pit. He'd been on perimeter duty, avoiding the cell block, but tonight he carried a tray, a lukewarm sandwich and a plastic cup of water, his hands trembling as he slid it through the slot. "Eat, man, you look half dead," Reese muttered, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder at the empty hall, the other guards off smoking or sleeping. Isaiah's swollen eyes met his, reading the flicker of unease, and he rasped, "You don't belong here." A test, a spark in the dark. Reese flinched, his fingers brushing a pocket, then slipped a small folding knife through the bars, its blade dulled but sharp enough, whispering, "I'm done with this shit. Langston's a monster. Get out." Isaiah's pulse surged, his good hand snatching the knife, tucking it under the mattress as Reese backed away, disappearing into the shadows, his footsteps fading fast. The cell fell silent again. The bulbs buzzed the only sound as Isaiah worked the blade, sawing at the zip ties, his fingers slick with blood, each cut a jolt of pain until the plastic snapped, his wrists free, circulation rushing back in pins. And needles. He stood shaky but alive, the knife gripped tight and edged to the bars, the lock a rusted relic, its pins loose from neglect. He jimmied it, the blade catching, then clicking, the door creaking open into a dim corridor, damp walls, gleaming under a single red exit sign. Voices rumbled ahead, two guards arguing over a card game, their backs to him as he slipped past, a ghost in the gloom, his Oxfords silent on the slick floor. An alarm panel blinked red, unguarded, and he smashed it with the knife's handle. Sparks flying as sirens screeched to life, a chaos cloak to mask his flight. He bolted for a side door, shoving it open into Harborview's stormy night, rain lashing his face, lightning cracking the sky as thunder rolled, drowning the shouts behind him. Holt and Payne burst from the cell block, Holt's buzzcut drenched, Payne's sunburned neck glistening, their yells lost in the gale as they spotted him sprinting across the junkyard, rusted car husks gleaming wet under floodlights. Isaiah vaulted a fence, barbed wire snagging his sleeve, tearing flesh as he dropped, Payne a white-hot flare he ignored, his eyes locking on a motorcycle propped against a shed, its keys dangling in the ignition, a junkie's ride left to rust. He swung a leg over, the engine coughing to life, sputtering then roaring as he gunned it. Tires spinning mud before gripping pavement, rain blinding him as he tore through the storm. Holt fired, bullets pinging off scrap metal, Payne screaming, "He's gone!" as they scrambled for a cruiser, its headlights flaring in pursuit, weaving through traffic, smashing a fruit stand, oranges rolling like bright ghosts in the downpour, a bystander's windshield cracking as they plowed past. Langston stormed. From his office, his radio crackling with Holt's panic, "He's on a bike heading downtown," and slammed a fist into the wall, plaster crumbling, his roar shaking the bunker. "Lock the city down, every unit now!" Isaiah leaned into the wind, the courthouse a faint glow on the horizon, his mind razor sharp, freedom a breath away, the bike's rumble a war cry as he swerved through alleys, rain stinging his cuts, every turn a gamble with death. He'd expose them, drag their lies into the light, the knife still clutched in his pocket, a bloody promise of the fight ahead, Holt and Payne's headlights shrinking then growing in his mirror, a relentless chase through the tempest, Harborview's, streets a battlefield he refused to lose. If you're cheering Isaiah's guts, toss number 1 in the comments, smack that like if you're riding with him, and subscribe to catch this storm's next strike. Visualize the rain, the chase, the edge of freedom. Can he outrun the hounds snapping at his heels? Isaiah Coleman roared through Harborview's rain-slicked streets, the motorcycle's engine growling beneath him, its tires cutting a jagged path through puddles that reflected the city's neon glow, his torn grey suit plastered to his skin by the storm. Lightning flared, illuminating the courthouse ahead, a hulking stone fortress with arched windows glowing faint against the black sky, his destination a beacon through the chaos. His left arm ached, the greys wound a steady pulse of pain. Blood, mixing with rainwater, dripping from his elbow as he gripped the handlebars, his cracked knuckles white from the cold. Holt and Payne's cruiser loomed in his mirror, headlights slashing through the downpour, but he swerved into a narrow alley, the bike skidding past trash cans, metal clanging as he lost them in the maze, their sirens fading into the thunder's rumble. He ditched the motorcycle behind a dumpster, its engine ticking as it cooled, and staggered through a side street, mud caking his shredded Oxfords, his breath a ragged cloud in the damp air. A flickering sign caught his eye, Harbour Safe House, a rundown brick building with boarded windows, a known refuge for activists. Its door cracked open by a woman in a hooded jacket, her voice sharp. "Get in now." Her name was Marla, a 40-year-old lawyer with steel-grey streaks in her braids and a scar on her lip from a protest gone wrong. Her eyes scanning him, taking in the bruises, the blood, the defiance still burning in his gaze. She pulled him. Inside, the door slamming shut, the room a clutter of folding chairs, laptops, and stacks of legal books, the air thick with coffee and desperation. "You're a damn mess, Judge," she said, tossing him a towel, her tone gruff but warm as he wiped rain and grime from his face, wincing as the fabric grazed his cuts. A dozen others milled around, activists in worn hoodies, a paralegal typing furiously, their faces lit by screens showing the crash video, the rally chaos, posts piling up with, "Where's Isaiah?" Marla handed him a burner phone. "Clara's. On it, she's got files. We're building your case." Isaiah sank into a chair, his ribs screaming, and dialed, Clara's voice cutting through static. "Holt's got a rap sheet, hate crimes. Payne's tied to Langston's bribes. We've got proof." Her words were bullets, each one loading his resolve as he rasped, "Get it to the courthouse. I'm ending this." Marla nodded, pulling a black robe from a duffel, its fabric crisp despite the chaos. "Found this in storage. You're presiding, right?" He took it, the weight grounding him, slipping it over his ruined suit. The judge emerging from the wreck of the man, his reflection in a cracked mirror showing a battered warrior, not a victim. The safe house buzzed, a printer spitting documents, a kid in a beanie hacking precinct logs, unearthing Langston's payoffs to city council. A goldmine of corruption Isaiah could wield like a gavel. Outside, Harborview boiled, protesters storming City Hall, their chants a dull roar through the walls, tires burning in the streets as news choppers circled, their spotlights sweeping the night. They suspended Holt and Payne. "Investigation pending," Marla said, scrolling a tablet. "But Langston's pulling strings. We've got hours, not days." Isaiah stood, the robe swaying, his voice steady. "Then we move now." And they piled into a van, Marla driving, the engine coughing as they sped toward the courthouse, dodging barricades, the city a war zone of flashing lights and smoke. He clutched a dossier, pages fluttering, evidence of Holt's assaults, Payne's threats, Langston's empire of graft, his mind racing, plotting every question, every ruling to bury them. The van screeched to a stop, the courthouse steps slick with rain. A crowd parting as he climbed, robe billowing, his Oxford slipping but holding, each step a reclaiming of power. Inside, the halls echoed, clerks scattering. A bailiff gaping as Isaiah strode to his chambers, pulling files, his breath short, but his will ironclad. But Langston wasn't idle, his shadow stretching across the precinct, a mole in the safe house. Slipping arsenic into a water bottle left on Isaiah's desk, a clear plastic trap labeled courtesy, the poison odorless, deadly, a whisper from the traitor, "You'll never finish this," as they vanished into the bustle. Isaiah entered the courtroom, gavel in hand, the wood cool against his palm, his vision swimming from exhaustion, not yet the poison. The gallery packed with reporters, activists, citizens, their murmurs a rising tide as he took the bench, robe, settling around him like armor, ready to face Holt and Payne, unaware of the silent killer waiting in his next sip, Langston's final play ticking down. Marla stood by, her eyes fierce, the dossier spread before him, hope rekindling in the flickering, fluorescent light, a judge reborn from the ashes poised to strike. Isaiah Coleman sat behind the judge's bench in Harborview's municipal court, the black robe heavy on his shoulders, its crisp folds a stark contrast to the battered man beneath, his grey suit hidden under the fabric, torn and blood-stained from days of hell. The courtroom hummed, a cavernous space with high ceilings and dark wood paneling, the air thick with tension, the gallery packed shoulder to shoulder, reporters scribbling, activists clutching signs folded under seats, their eyes locked on him. His left arm throbbed, the graze wound a dull ache, his ribs a tight cage of pain with every breath, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead, not just from exhaustion, but the arsenic seeping into his system, a slow burn he couldn't yet name. The gavel rested in his hand, cool and solid, a lifeline as he scanned the room, his vision blurring at the edges, the dossier Marla had handed him spread open, pages trembling slightly in his grip. The water bottle sat untouched on the desk, its plastic glinting under the fluorescent lights, a silent threat he hadn't sipped, his throat parched but instinct keeping him wary. Officers Derek Holt and Travis Payne shuffled in, their uniforms swapped for cheap suits, Holt's buzz cut, stark against his pale, clenched jaw, Payne's sunburned neck flushed red, his restless hands tugging at a tie too tight. Their bravado was gone, replaced by a twitchy unease, their eyes darting to the crowd, avoiding Isaiah's piercing stare as he slammed the gavel, the crack echoing like a gunshot, silencing the murmurs. "Court is in session," he declared, his voice steady despite the tremor in his gut. "Officers Holt and Payne, you stand accused of racial profiling, unlawful arrest and abuse of power. Do you have anything to say?" Holt shifted, his lips parting. "We were following protocol, Your Honor." A weak croak while Payne nodded. "Got a theft report, acted on it." Their words hollow, crumbling under the weight of the lie. Isaiah leaned forward, his gaze ablade. "Let's see the evidence." And Marla stepped up, her braids swaying, sliding a tablet across the bench, viral videos cued, the pier arrest in shaky focus, Holt slamming him against the sedan, Payne twisting his arm, the crowd's gasps a chorus of outrage. The room erupted, gasps and shouts rippling through the gallery, a woman in a purple scarf yelling, "That's no protocol!" as Isaiah banged the gavel again. "Order!" Witnesses followed, a fisherman from the pier, his hands rough with calluses, testifying they had no cause, just targeted him, his voice shaking with anger. Then a teenage barista, her phone footage matching the tablets. He didn't resist. They lied. Isaiah's head pounded, sweat trickling down his temple. The arsenic's grip tightening, his stomach churning as he fought to focus, the room tilting but his will anchoring him. The dossier unfolded, Holt's hate crime record, a string of dropped assault charges, Payne's threats caught on body cams Langston had buried, each page a hammer blow to their defense, the crowd's murmurs swelling into a roar. "Guilty," Isaiah pronounced, his voice cutting through the din, the gavel slamming. "On all counts, pending sentencing." And the gallery exploded, cheers crashing against boos, reporters scrambling, flashes popping as Holt's fists clenched, Payne's face crumpling, their fate sealed in that moment. Victory surged, a fleeting blaze in Isaiah's chest, the system bending under his hand, justice clawing free from the muck, and he thought, this is it. They're done. But Langston stormed in, his hulking frame filling the rear doors, his scar, a livid slash as he shoved through, a briefcase swinging, his voice booming, "Hold it, Your Honor." He slapped forged documents onto the prosecution table, a crooked grin splitting his face. "This man's no judge. Revoked license, fraud, case dismissed." The papers claimed Isaiah's credentials were fake, a sting operation from years back, signatures doctored, dates mismatched, a lie so bold it stunned the room silent. Marla lunged. "That's bullshit, he's presided for a decade!" But Langston waved a hand. "Check the state registry, he's out." His bluff backed by a hacked database, the screen in the clerk's booth flickering to a forged entry. License terminated 2019. The crowd faltered, whispers snaking through, a reporter muttering, "Is he legit?" As doubt poisoned the air, Holt smirking now, Payne straightening, their defeat unraveling in seconds. Isaiah's vision swam, the arsenic hitting hard, his knees buckling as he gripped the bench, the gavel slipping, clattering to the floor, his breath a shallow wheeze. This isn't over. But the words slurred, his body folding, the poisons, clock striking as he collapsed, robe pooling around him like spilled ink. The courtroom spun into chaos, Marla shouting, "Call a medic!" As Langston retreated, his laugh a low rumble. Holt and Payne slipping out, free in the madness, the crowd fracturing, some rushing the bench, others fleeing, justice snatched. From Isaiah's hands, his triumph a mirage shattered by a forged lie and a silent killer. Isaiah Coleman lay crumpled on the courtroom floor, the black robe pooling around him like a dark tide. His gavel rolling to a stop against the bench, its thud lost in the chaos erupting overhead. His chest heaved, shallow gasps rattling through. Him? The arsenic's fire scorching his veins, sweat soaking his brow as his vision blurred, the room a swirl of shouting faces and flashing lights. His torn grey suit peeked from under the robe, blood and grime a stark map of his ordeal. The greys wound on his arm, oozing through the unraveling bandage, his ribs a vice of pain clamping tighter with every faltering breath. Marla's voice pierced the din, sharp and frantic. "Somebody get a medic now!" As she dropped to her knees beside him, her braids brushing his face, her hands shaking as she pressed fingers to his neck, feeling a pulse weak but stubborn. The gallery surged, reporters shoving for angles, their cameras clicking like vultures, activists clashing with bailiffs, a man in a plaid shirt yelling, "They poisoned him!" while Langston's forged dismissal echoed in the air, a venomous seed taking root. Paramedics burst through, a stretcher clattering, their boots squeaking on the polished wood as they hoisted Isaiah up, his body limp, head lolling, the robe slipping to reveal the wreckage beneath, bruises blooming purple across, his torso blood streaking his arm. Marla followed, barking orders. "Harborview General, move it." And the stretcher rolled out, sirens wailing as they sped through the courthouse doors, the crowd parting, some weeping, others filming, the night swallowing them in a blur of red and blue. The hospital was a fluorescent labyrinth, its halls buzzing with antiseptic and urgency, doctors in scrubs swarming as Isaiah flatlined on the gurney, his heart stuttering, a shrill beep cutting through the clamor. "Clear!" A medic shouted, defibrillator paddles slamming his chest, his body jerking once, twice, the monitor flickering back to a jagged rhythm, fragile but alive. They wheeled him into ICU, tubes snaking into his arms, an oxygen mask fogging with his shallow breaths, machines humming a grim lullaby as doctors barked, "Tox screen, stat!" Langston's shadow loomed across town, his hulking frame pacing the precinct, his scarred cheek twitching as he dialed a burner, his voice a growl, "Make sure he stays down, pay the staff." A nurse, a wiry man with nervous eyes named Curtis, pocketed a wad of cash, his hands trembling as he swapped Isaiah's chart, whispering to a colleague, "No antidote, let it run." His betrayal bought for a daughter's tuition, a secret buried in the hospital's chaos. Holt and Payne celebrated in a dive bar, Holt's buzz cut gleaming under neon, Payne's sunburned neck flushed with cheap whiskey, their laughter roar as they torched evidence in a back alley, charred papers curling into ash. Holt grinning, "He's finished, we're clear." Harborview erupted, protests turning feral, tires blazing in the streets, Molotovs shattering precinct windows, glass raining as chants of "Justice for Isaiah" clashed with riot shields, the city a powder keg lit by his collapse. News vans circled, anchors breathless. Judge Coleman down, poison suspected, the courtroom footage looping, his fall a viral wound tearing the city apart. In the ICU, Isaiah's eyes flickered, the world a haze of white coats and beeping monitors, his mind clawing through fog, fragments of the trial flashing, Holt's smirk, Langston's lie, the water bottle he'd never touched, a puzzle locking into place. A new nurse, Elena, a stout woman with fierce eyes and a cross necklace, slipped in, her shift fresh, her gaze narrowing at Curtis's jittery exit, then at Isaiah's chart, numbers screaming wrong. "This ain't right," she muttered, snatching a vial from a locked cabinet, her hands steady as she injected antidote into his IV, arsenic's grip loosening as his pulse steadied, color creeping back to his ashen face. She leaned close, whispering, "You're not dying today, Judge." Her defiance a quiet rebellion against Langston's reach, her badge tucked away as she slipped out, unnoticed by the bribed staff. Isaiah gasped awake, his chest heaving, the mask fogging faster. Clarity cutting through the haze, his voice a croak. "They won't win?" His good hand clenching, the fight reigniting in his core. Machines beeped stronger, doctors rushing back. "He's stabilizing." As Elena vanished into the hall, a ghost who'd tipped the scales. Langston's phone buzzed, a mole hissing, "He's alive! Antidote got through!" And his fist shattered. A precinct window, blood dripping as he roared, "Find him, finish it!" He rigged a new trap, a bomb under Isaiah's bed. Wires snaking to a timer, 30 minutes ticking down tick-tock, his vengeance a heartbeat away. Isaiah stumbled up, ripping off the mask, tubes tangling as he lurched from the bed, his legs, jelly but driven. The robe gone, just the ruined suit now, a warrior's tattered armor. He grabbed a scalpel from a tray, his eyes wild, spotting the blinking red under the mattress, the bomb's hum a death knell. He bolted, crashing through a fire exit, alarms shrieking as the hospital blurred behind him, rain hitting his face again, the explosion rocking the ward seconds later, glass shattering, screams rising, Langston's plan a fiery miss. Isaiah vanished into the night, a phoenix burned but unbroken, his vow a whisper in the storm. One more fight. Isaiah Coleman stumbled through Harborview's rain-soaked streets, the night a shroud of shadow and fury, his torn grey suit clinging to his battered frame, the hospital's antiseptic stench still in his nose, replaced now by the acrid bite of smoke and wet asphalt. His left arm hung useless, the greys wound a throbbing mess, blood diluted by the downpour. His ribs a jagged ache with every step, the scalpel clutched in his good hand, glinting under flickering streetlights. The bomb's blast echoed behind. Him, a fireball blooming from the hospital ward, glass raining onto the pavement as screams pierced the storm. Langston's latest failure, a thunderclap in the city's chaos. His legs trembled, the antidote warring with lingering poison, but his mind burned clear, a hidden mic taped to his chest under the shredded fabric, a desperate gamble he'd rigged in the black site cell, its tiny red light blinking, recording every snarl, every threat from Holt, Payne and Langston, a lifeline he'd clung to through the torment. He aimed for City Hall, its marble steps a faint glow through the haze, a press conference unfolding under floodlights, Langston's hulking frame center stage, his scarred cheek twitching as he spun lies to a sea of cameras. Coleman's reign of terror ends tonight. We've cleaned up this city. Isaiah's pulse hammered, his cracked Oxford slipping on wet cobblestones as he pushed through a crowd, protesters and reporters parting, their gasps a ripple as they saw him, a ghost risen from the wreckage, his robe gone, just the man, bloody, but unbowed. He crashed the stage, shoving past a stunned aide, the mic ripping from Langston's hand as he rasped, "Enough!" His voice a gravelly roar cutting through the rain, the crowd silencing, cameras swiveling, lenses zooming on his ravaged face. "This ends now," he said, tearing the mic from his chest, wires dangling, and jacked it into a speaker, static crackling before Langston's voice boomed out. "Bury him, make it look good," followed by Holt's snarl, "Know your place." And Payne's laugh, "Break him." Every word from the black site torture etched in audio, a damning symphony of guilt. The crowd erupted, shouts of "Murderers!" crashing against Langston's stunned silence, his meaty hands clenching. Holt and Payne frozen backstage, their cheap suits soaked, faces paling as feds swarmed from the shadows, badges flashing. Cuffs snapping on wrists, Holt's buzzcut bowed, Payne's sunburned neck slumping. Isaiah staggered, the mic dropping, his breath a wheeze as he pointed at Langston. "You're done." And the captain lunged, fists raised, only for agents to tackle him, his scar pressed to the wet stage, a roar swallowed by the storm. bomb had been a decoy, a distraction rigged by a safe house tech days ago. Its blast timed to clear Isaiah's path, a chess move Langston never saw. The hospital chaos a smokescreen for this moment. Feds hauled them off, sirens wailing anew, the crowd cheering, a tidal wave of relief washing over Harborview, news tickers flashing, corruption exposed, Coleman vindicated. Isaiah sank to his knees, rain streaking his face, his voice breaking. As he addressed the cameras, "I'm no savior, just a spark," and stood pulling the ruined suit jacket tight. "I resign. This bench isn't mine anymore." His words a gut punch, the crowd faltering, some sobbing, others nodding. His exit a sacrifice for a city he'd bled to save. He limped down the steps, Marla rushing to his side, her braids dripping. "You did it!" But his eyes were distant. The fight won, the cost carved into his bones. Harborview shifted, dawn breaking grey and slow, protests morphing into reform rallies, city councils scrambling, new police recruits filing into the academy. Under Marla's watch, their faces a mix of races, determination etched in young eyes, a vision Isaiah's ordeal had birthed. He vanished into the streets, a lone figure fading into the mist, the scalpel dropped in a gutter, his shadow stretching long, then gone. Days later, a letter slid under his safe house door. No stamp, ink smeared. "We're not done, Judge." The words a chill, a new enemy lurking, a silhouette in a dark alley watching, smirking, a badge glinting on their chest, a fresh threat born from the ashes of Langston's fall. Isaiah read it, his jaw tightening. The war not over, just paused, a spark ready to ignite again. Harborview's scars deep, its future teetering on the edge of his next stand. The saga of Isaiah Coleman is a brutal mirror to the systemic racism that festers in places like Harborview, exposing how power can twist justice into a weapon against the innocent. His journey teaches us resilience, a man beaten, betrayed, and poisoned yet unbroken, turning every blow into a step toward truth. It's a stark reminder that prejudice isn't just personal, it's institutional, woven into precincts, courts, and city halls, where men like Holt, Payne, and Langston thrive until challenged. Isaiah's mic, a tiny device against a Goliath of corruption, shows that evidence and courage can topple giants, but only if wielded with unrelenting will. The Betrayal by Jamal and Tasha underscores trust's fragility in a world where fear coerces compliance. Yet Elena's quiet defiance proves one act of conscience can shift the tide. The story warns of victory's cost, Isaiah resigning not in defeat but in sacrifice, his spark igniting reform while leaving him scarred. It's a call to see beyond headlines, to question who writes the narrative when a judge becomes a fugitive, and to recognize that change demands more than outrage. It needs action, persistence, and unity. Harborview's rebirth, sparked by one man's stand, teaches that justice isn't a gift, it's a fight. And the letter at the end whispers a chilling truth: the battle never truly ends. New enemies rise from old ashes. What lingers is hope, fragile but fierce, a city teetering on equity's edge, built by those who refuse to bow. So, what's the lesson? Stand up, speak out, and hold tight to the spark, because in the face of systemic wrong, silence is surrender. What would you do if justice turned on you? Drop number 1 in the comments if you'd fight like Isaiah, like this if his story fuels your fire, and subscribe plus share to spread this spark. Thanks for riding this storm with us. Here's to courage and a world where truth prevails.